Napoleon. Europe did not need one more general. Then Napoleon arrived, and suddenly, every king on the continent had to check the map twice. His real weapon was not height, and definitely not humility. It was tempo, moving faster than panic could organize itself. He was born on August 15, 1769, in Ajaccio, Corsica. Corsican by birth, French by career, and imperial by attitude. At first, he was just an artillery officer with bad hair and terrifying math. Then the French Revolution turned Europe into a burning chessboard, and Napoleon realized he was very good at moving the pieces. In Italy, he beat older generals so fast they looked like they were buffering. His secret was speed, concentration, and hitting one enemy before the others arrived. He organized armies into corps, smaller forces that could march separately and smash together. To enemies, it felt like fighting one army that kept teleporting. He did not merely win battles, he made opponents feel late to their own defeat. At Austerlitz, in 1805, he staged his masterpiece. He pretended to be weak, let the Allies attack, and then broke their center. That battle was so clean it looked less like war and more like a trapdoor. After that, kings who had inherited thrones started fearing a man who had invented one. He became Emperor of the French in 1804 because subtlety was not his hobby. His soldiers called him the Little Corporal, which sounds adorable until he invades your country. He also understood morale. Men followed him because victory seemed to follow him first. But Napoleon also had the classic conqueror disease. The map was never big enough. In 1812, he marched into Russia with the Grande Armée. Russia answered with distance, winter, fire, hunger, and absolutely no hospitality. The army that entered as an empire returned as a ghost story. Then came exile, comeback, and finally Waterloo in 1815. At Waterloo, the timing was wrong, the mud was horrible, and Wellington refused to panic. When the Prussians arrived, Napoleon's last gamble collapsed. He died on May 5, 1821, on St. Helena, a lonely Atlantic island that feels designed by someone who hated dramatic exits. Officially, he died from stomach illness, probably cancer. But the legend did what Napoleon always wanted. It refused to stay small. Alejandro Magno. Imagine being 22 and deciding the Persian Empire is your side quest. That was Alexander. Young enough to be reckless, brilliant enough to make it work. His enemies had numbers, cities, gold, and centuries of power. Alexander had timing, nerve, and the expression of a man allergic to limits. He was born in 356 BC in Pella, Macedonia. His father, Philip II, had already turned Macedonia into a weapon. His teacher was Aristotle, which is basically cheating in the tutorial level of life. Before that, he had already tamed Bucephalus, the horse nobody else could control. So even his childhood resume was basically, difficult horse? Solved it. And the Persian Empire, the giant of the ancient world, suddenly had a teenager problem. At the Granicus River, he charged first, because apparently survival was optional. At Issus, he faced Darius III and sliced straight toward the royal center. Darius fled, leaving his family, treasure, and dignity behind. Then Alexander reached Tyre, a city sitting smugly on an island. Most commanders would see an island fortress and look for a navy. Alexander looked at the sea and apparently saw future road material. So he built a causeway through the sea because walls annoyed him personally. After 7 months, Tyre fell, and the message was very clear. Being surrounded by water was not enough protection from this man. His greatest victory came at Gaugamela in 331 BC. Darius had numbers, chariots, cavalry, and a giant battlefield prepared for him. Alexander had timing, nerve, and the habit of attacking the exact wrong place for comfort. He punched through, Darius ran again, and Persia effectively died on that field. Then he kept going east because apparently conquering Persia was just cardio. At the Hydaspes River, he fought King Porus and war elephants in India. He won, but his army finally looked at the horizon and said absolutely not. Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BC, only 32 years old. The cause is still debated: fever, disease, maybe poison, maybe too much everything. He left no stable empire, but he left a world permanently rearranged. Most commanders win territory. Alexander made geography feel temporary. Zizka. Most commanders need eyes to read a battlefield. John Žižka eventually had none, and somehow that made the story even more ridiculous. He did not command polished knights from a fairy tale. He turned wagons, peasants, and early gunpowder into medieval nightmare fuel. He was born around 1376 in Trochnov, Bohemia. Today we would call him Czech, But medieval Europe was not exactly tidy. Žižka did not look like a perfect knight from a clean painting. He looked like the man you send when the perfect knight has already failed. He lost one eye early in life, and later lost the other at Robbie Castle. Most commanders lose depth perception and retire. Žižka lost sight and kept scheduling victories. He became the military brain of the Hussite Wars in Bohemia. The conflict began after reformer Jan Hus was executed, and Bohemia exploded. Suddenly, a religious movement needed to survive professional crusading armies. His troops were often peasants, townsmen, and religious rebels, not shiny aristocrats. So Žižka did something extremely rude to medieval cavalry. He turned wagons into mobile fortresses, packed with crossbows, hand cannons, and angry farmers. Imagine a medieval battle bus, but everyone inside is having a theological argument. At Subotai in 1420, he used terrain, wagons, and mud like weapons. At Vitkov Hill, he helped stop a crusading army threatening Prague. The position was narrow, ugly, and perfect for making superior numbers useless. Žižka did not need a fair fight. He needed a place where fairness went to die. At Kutna Hora, he escaped encirclement using mobile artillery in a way that felt illegal. His enemies had armor, banners, noble blood, and confidence. Žižka had wagons, discipline, gunpowder, and absolutely no respect for tradition. That is why he feels strangely modern. He understood systems before romance. He died on October 11th, 1424, near Przybyslav. Not in a glorious duel, but likely from plague during campaign. Even his death became legend. His followers were called the orphans because when your blind general dies, apparently the army still refuses to calm down. Hannibal Barca. Rome was used to enemies. Hannibal was different. He felt personal. He did not knock on Italy's front door. He climbed over the roof with elephants. That is not strategy. That is weaponized audacity with frostbite. Hannibal Barca was born in 247 BC in Carthaginian North Africa. He was Carthaginian, raised in a city with one very specific hobby: annoying Rome. As a boy, tradition says he swore never to be a friend of Rome. His father, Hamilcar Barca, had fought Rome and passed down the family grudge. Some families inherit land. The Barcids inherited an international incident, and unlike most childhood promises, this one became everyone else's problem. His army froze, starved, and shrank before even reaching the battlefield. But when he arrived, Rome discovered the survivors were still terrifying. At Trebia, he used cold, ambush, and Roman impatience like ingredients in soup. At Lake Trasimene, he trapped an entire Roman army between hills and water. Then came Cannae. In 216 BC, the nightmare Rome never forgot. Hannibal let the Roman center push forward, almost like he was losing. Then his wings closed around them, and the trap became a circle. Cannae became the textbook example of how to destroy a larger army. For years, Hannibal walked through Italy like Rome's unpaid anxiety consultant. Rome responded with the Fabian strategy: avoid him, delay him, exhaust him. It was not glamorous, but it was safer than volunteering for another Cannae. But he never took Rome itself, and that crack mattered. Eventually, Scipio attacked Carthage, forcing Hannibal home. At Zama in 202 BC, Hannibal finally lost. Rome survived, learned from him, and then became the empire he had tried to prevent. Hannibal died around 183 to 181 BC in Bithynia. When Rome's reach finally came for him, he reportedly chose poison. He did not destroy Rome, but he taught Rome what terror looked like. Saladino. Before Saladin recovered Jerusalem, he suffered one of history's most cinematic embarrassments. He was beaten by a teenage king whose body was being destroyed by leprosy. That sounds like legend. The uncomfortable part is, it actually belongs in the story. Saladin was born in 1137 or 1138 in Tikrit. He was Kurdish by origin and became the founder of the Ayyubid dynasty. He rose in a world split by crusader states, Muslim rivals, and holy cities. Eventually, he ruled Egypt and Syria, giving him the jaws to bite Jerusalem. But in 1177, those jaws nearly snapped shut on the wrong hand. Saladin invaded the kingdom of Jerusalem expecting a weak enemy. Opposing him was Baldwin IV, young, sick, fragile, and somehow terrifying. At Montgazard, fragility arrived on horseback with a sword. The Crusader force was much smaller, but struck Saladin at the perfect moment. Saladin escaped, but his army was shattered. For a future nightmare of the Crusaders, that loss is deliciously awkward. And that is what makes his comeback better. He learned, waited, unified, and turned patience into a weapon. 10 years later, in 1187, he trapped the Crusader army at Hattin. The Crusaders marched thirsty through heat, smoke, and bad decisions. Saladin controlled the water, the ground, and the rhythm. At Hattin, the army of Jerusalem was defeated and effectively broken. Then Jerusalem itself surrendered to Saladin in October 1187. The fall of Jerusalem shocked Europe so hard it helped trigger the Third Crusade. That brought Richard the Lionheart because medieval history enjoys dramatic casting. He had lost to the Leper King, survived, adapted, and returned as history. Even his enemies remembered him as dangerous, disciplined, and strangely honorable. Saladin died on March 4, 1193, in Damascus. He left behind a reputation larger than his treasury. Because some commanders win by rage, Saladin won by returning smarter. Why Sun Sin? Yi Sun Sin's most famous order came while he was dying. Do not announce my death. The battle is still happening. That is the kind of sentence that makes every normal retirement plan look pathetic. He was born on April 28, 1545 in Seoul, Joseon, Korea. He became an admiral, which is unfair because the sea seemed to work for him. During the Imjin War, Japan invaded Korea with massive forces. On land, Korea was in disaster mode. At sea, Yi became the firewall. He used disciplined crews, coastal knowledge, cannons, and ships built for brutal close fighting. His diary shows a commander constantly worried about weather, supplies, politics, and timing. So yes, the legend also did paperwork. Unfortunately for Japan, he did it well. The famous turtle ships looked like floating headaches for anyone trying to board them. Yi won early naval victories that cut Japanese supply lines again and again. At Hansen Island, he used a crane wing formation to pull the Japanese into destruction. It sounds poetic until you realize the poetry is made of cannon fire. And then, because history loves testing useful people, he was arrested and tortured. He was demoted to common soldier while the war still needed him. Then Korea's navy was nearly destroyed under another commander. So they brought Yi back and handed him only a handful of ships. At Myeongyang in 1597, he had about 13 ships. The Japanese fleet was far larger, which is normally the part where people panic. Yi looked at the currents, the narrow strait, and decided panic was for amateurs. He used the sea like a trapdoor, forcing the enemy into chaos. Myeongyang became one of the most ridiculous underdog naval victories ever recorded, not because Yi had more ships, but because he had more battlefield in his head. When Noryang finally came, the opening scene of this story makes sense. Yi was not only trying to win a naval battle, he was trying to keep Korea breathing. That is why his legend does not end with the bullet, it ends with the drums continuing. Genghis Khan. Some commanders conquer cities. Genghis Khan made cities decide whether existing was worth the risk. By the time his horsemen arrived, fear often got there first. But the machine began with a boy abandoned on the steppe. He was born around 1162 near Lake Baikal, or the Onon River. His birth name was Temujin, and his childhood was basically survival horror. His father was poisoned, his family was abandoned, and comfort did not apply. From that mess, Temujin learned loyalty, revenge, and the value of terrifying organization. By 1206, he had united the Mongol tribes and became Genghis Khan. That title meant something like universal ruler, which is subtle only if you are already terrified. His army was not just riders with bows. It was a machine with hooves. Each warrior could change horses, fire backward, and vanish before slower armies understood the question. They carried dried food, spare mounts, and a level of mobility sedentary armies hated. They used decimal units, strict discipline, signal flags, scouts, spies, and speed. The famous trick was the fake retreat. Run away just enough to make fools follow. Then turn, surround, and explain the joke with arrows. Against the Jin dynasty in northern China, the Mongols learned siege warfare. Against the Khwarezmian Empire, Genghis turned revenge into continental punishment. Cities that surrendered could survive. Cities that resisted became warnings with architecture. His reputation moved faster than his horses. He also used intelligence networks and messengers, because terror works better with logistics. The Mongols did not just appear. They scouted, measured, divided, and then appeared. Some enemies were defeated before the Mongols arrived, simply by imagining what arrival meant. Genghis was brutal, but also weirdly meritocratic for his world. If you were useful, loyal, and competent, your birth mattered less than your results. He died on August 18, 1227, during a campaign against Xia. The exact cause is uncertain because apparently even his death wanted operational security. But by then, the empire he created was already larger than most imaginations. Genghis did not conquer like a man. He conquered like a weather system. Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar entered the Senate thinking he was the most powerful man in Rome. A few minutes later, the Senate had turned into a group project in murder. That ending was shocking, but it only worked because his life had become impossible to ignore. He was born on July 12th or 13th, 100 BC, in Rome. Roman, aristocratic, ambitious, and allergic to being ordinary. Caesar's genius was that he understood battles and publicity. He did the conquering, then wrote the version everyone was supposed to remember. In Gaul, from 58 to 50 BC, he built his legend. Before that, pirates kidnapped him, and he allegedly told them their ransom was too low. Later he returned, captured them, and proved his ego came with follow-through. He fought tribes, crossed rivers, built bridges, and made senators back home nervous. He even invaded Britain twice, partly because apparently Gaul was not enough paperwork. Those expeditions were not permanent conquest, but they were brilliant publicity. At Alesia in 52 BC, Vercingetorix trapped himself inside a fortress. Then a huge relief army arrived outside Caesar's lines. So Caesar built walls facing in and walls facing out. That is not a siege. That is a Roman construction company having a panic attack. He beat both armies and finished the conquest of Gaul. But victory made Caesar too powerful for the Republic to digest. In 49 BC, he crossed the Rubicon with his army. That was not just a river crossing, it was a declaration of civil war. At Pharsalus, he defeated Pompey, his great Roman rival. At Zela, he summed up a victory with 3 words: I came, I saw, I conquered. Efficient, arrogant, and honestly annoyingly good branding. On March 15, 44 BC, Brutus Cassius and other senators struck. They claimed they were saving the Republic. Instead, they helped bury it. Caesar won so much power that even his murder could not undo him. Khalid Ibn Al-Walid. Khalid Ibn Al-Walid first became terrifying on the wrong side of the story. At Uhud, before his conversion, his cavalry helped turn the battle against Muhammad's forces. So yes, one of Islam's greatest generals first fought against it. He was born in Mecca, likely in the late 6th century. He was Arab from the Quraysh and built like a problem armies could not solve. After converting, Khalid became the commander enemies hated to see on the horizon. He earned the title Saif Allah, the Sword of God. That is an intimidating nickname because nobody calls you that for good attendance. During the Ridda Wars, he crushed rebellions across Arabia with brutal speed. At Yamama, the fighting was so fierce that victory came with a heavy price. Khalid was not a clean hero. He was a commander from a hard age. Then he moved into Iraq and Syria, fighting Persians and Byzantines. His desert march to Syria became legendary, fast, risky, and nearly insane. He understood movement like other men understood walls. At Yarmouk in 636, he faced the Byzantine Empire. The battle was massive, chaotic, and decisive for control of Syria. He kept cavalry in reserve like a knife hidden behind the back. Whenever a section bent, that cavalry appeared and made the problem someone else's. Khalid used mobile cavalry to hit weak points and rescue collapsing lines. When the Byzantines broke, the Eastern Mediterranean changed forever. His career was not spotless or gentle, but militarily it was terrifyingly effective. Later he was removed from supreme command, not because he failed, but because he was too famous. He died in 642, traditionally in Homs, far from the martyrdom he wanted. Tradition says his body carried scars from battle, but he died in bed. For a man called the Sword of God, that ending feels almost cruelly ironic. Subotai. Subotai is the scary one because most people do not know they should be scared. He was not the famous face of the Mongol Empire. He was the operating system. While others became legends, Subotai made the logistics arrive on time. He was born around 1175, somewhere in the Mongol world. While Genghis Khan terrified the world, Subotai made the terror arrive on schedule. He was one of the greatest strategists in Mongol history, maybe in all history. He could fight in China, then plan in Russia, then terrify Hungary. Most generals have a theater of war. Subotai treated Eurasia like one room. His specialty was coordinating armies separated by enormous distances. No phones, no satellites, no group chat, just riders, timing, and terrifying competence. In 1223, at the Kalka River, he helped crush a much larger Rus force. The Mongols retreated for days, stretching the enemy like cheap rope. Then they turned, and the trap snapped shut. Later, under Ogedei Khan, Subotai helped drive the invasion of Europe. In 1241, Mongol armies hit Legnica and Mohi, almost like coordinated lightning. At Mohi, he used engineers and siege weapons to break a river defense. So the stereotype of simple horse archers misses the point completely. Subotai brought archers, engineers, spies, and timing into one moving weapon. That is the scary part. He was not just fast, he adapted. European knights expected a cavalry raid. Subotai delivered an operational-level nightmare. He did not need to be the loudest man in the room. He needed the enemy to realize too late that the room had no exits. Subotai died around 1248. after decades of campaigns. Unlike many conquerors, he seems to have died away from a dramatic battlefield, but his work remained on the map in the form of borders that no longer existed. Subotai is the perfect final boss, the commander most people never saw coming. 10 commanders, 10 different ways to make history panic. Napoleon turned speed into empire, then discovered winter had other plans. Alexander made the Persian Empire look like a door someone forgot to lock. Žižka turned wagons, peasants, and gunpowder into medieval nightmare fuel. Hannibal crossed mountains with elephants, because normal routes were apparently boring. Saladin lost to a leper king, learned from it, and came back for Jerusalem. Sin took 13 ships and made the ocean feel unfair. Genghis Khan turned scattered tribes into a storm with saddles. Caesar won battles, wrote the story, and accidentally made murder useless. Khalid moved through deserts like the map owed him money. And Subotai proved the scariest commander might be the one behind the map. Some ruled empires, some broke empires, some simply made empires nervous forever. That is the common thread. Every one of them changed the room when he entered it. They were not all heroes. Some were brutal, some were brilliant, most were both. But every one of them changed what armies believed was possible.